Avi and I, actually he was called a Vrumi then, met in camp. His parents owned a children's camp in Camp Ashel, and we met in 1957, playing ping pong actually. And he was a counselor and I was a junior counselor. And we met in camp, and I thought he was very cute. The first time we went out, my husband asked me if I'd like to go bowling. So we had to walk up a half mile in very bad, hilly kind of terrain, and we tried to hitch, and of course we couldn't get a hitch. So we had to come down and ask his mommy and daddy if they can give us money for a taxi. And the rest is history.
My mom did not know what she was getting when she was marrying my dad. She was marrying a mathematics major at Yeshiva College. She didn't know she was marrying Rabbi Avi Weiss. She thought she was marrying this charismatic, leader, good-looking, amazing guy, but little did she know that he was going to accomplish so much.
And amongst other events unseen on Soviet television was a rally in Red Square by American Jews protesting Kremlin immigration policy.
Direct flights now! Direct! We are here with moral strength saying you cannot sit in a theater and watch the Bolshoi as human rights are being denied. It is un-American.
Through the Soviet Jewry movement, I think that's when we first met. It was the student struggle for Soviet Jewry in the early 60s. We were fighting a battle very, very much uphill. I was the chairman of Student Struggle for Soviet Jewry, and he became the chairman right after me.
Name Avi Weiss was one of the first names that I heard that very day when I was released from prison. He and Vitaly were telling me he was accompanying Vitaly to many places over the world. Hunger strikes, when I was on hunger strikes, was arrested and wanted to be arrested.
I was 14 years old, and my father, myself, and about 10 other doctors, we went in front of the Soviet embassy, and we were arrested together.
I think I went every single Sunday for a few years, whether we were protesting for Soviet Jewry, to free Sharansky, or Silva Zalmanson, or Kurt Waldheim, or Demanyuk. It didn't really matter. We were there, we were strong, and we were protesting. I thought that was a normal part of everybody's childhood.
Even during those moments where I was really nervous for him and scared, I was also deeply, deeply proud of him and felt just so honored. Like, wow, this is my father who's doing these amazing things.
They walked to the Vatican to voice their displeasure with the Pope. Again, they were kept far away from the papal ear.
They want the convent moved in accordance with the 1987 agreement. A month ago, Jewish protesters from New York who climbed the convent fence were doused with water and beaten by Polish workers.
Help me! Be removed! That cross be dismantled!
And called for a suspension of the peace process until the PLO covenant is changed. Until Arafat stops talking about taking Palestine with blood and fire. And demand the freedom of Jonathan Pollard right now.
Throughout all of those years and all of that traveling and all of that demonstrating, wherever there was a need to raise a voice of moral conscience, Avi Weiss was there. But the most remarkable thing is simultaneously, he was able to build a kehillah, to build a bayit right here in Riverdale.
When he was in Muncie, which is before he came to New York, he had already, established a reputation. He was lively, he was accomplishing, charismatic, teaching already very successfully. At that time, I think it was in '72, I realized that I'm going to give up RJC and go back to university. I started to think quickly about what about a successor? And I thought of him, of course, that would be great. So I tried my best to convince him. And he thought and thought about it, and then to my great frustration, came back and said no. He said he came to the conclusion that this was an established congregation, would be very hard to change and move. And he really wanted to start from scratch.
Avi didn't want just another synagogue in Riverdale. He wanted a special kind of outreach synagogue that would reach people who weren't going to the other synagogues.
HIR began in the basement of the Whitehall on Henry Hudson Parkway in Riverdale, where we met in a boiler room.
Pipes hanging down and like condensation on the pipes.
Not your typical synagogue space, and yet people began to hear about this very charismatic rabbinic figure.
He opened the vision for women's participation and inclusion, not just for the community, but particularly for the women.
He began first with simply giving the Torah to women to carry, and then to give the Torah to women to dance with on Simchat Torah. And then he wrote a very important work, Women at Prayer, where he began to develop the possibility of women's prayer groups.
In the 1970s, Miriam Schachter decided that she wanted to convene a women's tefillah group. So she called Rabbi Weiss, and he went through the sources, and he also checked with Rabbi Soloveitchik. It met periodically in women's homes, and it was invited into the shul.
For over 10 years, the Riverdale Women's Tefillah was the only women's tefillah that was housed in a synagogue.
His commitment to giving voice to women in the shul and the Jewish community at large has truly been an inspiration for a whole generation of young women and of young men.
So Dov was in college at YU, and he had some wonderful rabbeim, and then he had others that were a little more difficult for him.
They would often criticize my father and my father's positions on a whole host of issues, ranging from Zionism, to the advancement of the standing of women in the Jewish tradition, to my dad's embrace of non-Orthodox Jews. And he was heavily criticized in the rabbinical school, and I was a student in the rabbinical school. This is at a time where my father was a professor at Stern College for Women.
For several months after that, that's what my husband and my son talked about at the Shabbos table. We need to have a more open rabbinical school, one that's more inclusive. I went with my husband to Florida, where we met with Rabbi Dov Linzer, and we scooped him back to New York.
There was a lot for me to get used to. I remember once I walked in and his shoes were off and he was strumming a guitar, and this wasn't exactly my classic image of a rabbi.
Higher and higher, everyone.
Rabbi Weiss firmly believed that the greatest way to make a difference for the Jewish community was to create a different type of a pulpit rabbi. He believed that the pulpit rabbis were the religious leaders that really impacted individuals' lives and communities.
What drew me to Rav Avi was his spiritual openness. I had started rabbinical school at Yeshiva University at RIETS, and Rabbi Weiss came over to myself and my then chavrusa, Rabbi Yaakov Simon, and on a walk home, put his arm around me and said, "Here's my plan. This is what we're going to do. We're going to start this new kollel, learning with Rabbi Dov Linzer, and then we're going to create a new rabbinical school." Well, and I was a little bit afraid, as were my parents, worried about how I was going to get a job. And then about 6 months in, 7 new students joined us, and we had a class of a total of 9. And then I realized that this dream was really going to come true.
Rabbi Weiss has created a generation of leading new outreach rabbis. And all in all, I think he will be credited with having been one of the great movers of a great movement of activist Judaism.
I met Rabbi Weiss when I was a high school student in a Boca Raton synagogue. Rabbi Brander brought him to talk to us about freeing Jonathan Pollard. And I remember being really touched even then by this person who I barely knew. I was accepted into Torah Miriam, and that was the first time I got to learn with Rav Avi.
I recall some of my early conversations with Avi about the ordination of women. I had a feeling of a combination of both anxiety and exhilaration, because I affirmed the idea of women's ordination, and somehow I didn't think it was going to happen this early in my lifetime.
We were on our way to Tashlich, and we're walking across the bridge. That was the first time he said to me, "What would it look like if you were a full member of the team? The time has come. We're ready."
He examined the sources felt that there was enough legitimation to give her the title, to ordain her, to give her smicha. And he felt it was justice. That was his attitude. How could he not go forward? He would have done the same with a man who had this degree of learning and who had served the Jewish people. And he was prepared to go forward despite the opposition that he knew would come. And it was quite amazing to me that there was somebody who was going to actualize what was really a dream in the minds of many like myself.
There's no question in my mind that history will not only uphold his position, but will honor him. The fact is, I think it was going to come anyway, but someone has to do it.
Rav is not afraid to be the first, and I think he understands that many, many people don't mind being second. I think Rav comes alive around music, and specifically Shlomo. He is happiest when he's surrounded by 2, 3, 4, 60 people singing, having a kumsitz.
He's an open, Orthodox Chassid. Maybe we should rename the movement Open Chassidus.
You know, there's so many aspects of him that people don't know. On Friday afternoon, he has a list of 50 people, and he calls them every Friday. I think my father is just wired differently.
Avi sees the suffering of every person. And at the same time, he sees the huge historical role of Jewish people not to let down to this person and to be light for the nations.
Rabbi Weiss has taught us all that the best Torah that you can teach emerges from life, from interactions and the inclusivity with all types of people.
Ohev Gerim, the one who loves the outsider, the stranger, the one who's in the marginal for the community. Oseh Mishpat Lashukim, the one who demands justice for the oppressed. He has really walked in all of God's ways, as I think all of us should dream of doing. Not only did himself, but then influenced and brought others to do the same thing.
He taught me, and he teaches the students, the famous line by Woody Allen, that 95% of life is just showing up, and how much it means for a rabbi to really just be there for somebody when in a time of need.
The synagogue is called the bayit, the home. So that was his home also. I mean, that was obviously his inner family is the family that means the most to him. But he also has the outer family, of the synagogue, of the bayit. I consider my father, as a best friend in many ways. I get his advice, and he calls me for advice. And when he calls me and he hangs up the phone, he always says, "Okay, Dov, I love you. I love you. I love you." He says it 3 times and then has to hang up the phone for whatever reason, in case I forgot.
My parents have an unbelievable marriage. They are so different, my father and my mother, and they just make it work so wonderfully. My mother is always there with my father, whether it's going to hospital visits with him or inviting people from the shul over, for meals. And even if my father happened to be away and somebody wasn't well, she'd be the stand-in. My parents are such wonderful grandparents. They call them Sabi Avi and Safti.
So this year, this June, we'll be celebrating our 50th wedding anniversary. I still see that 18-year-old, very, very handsome man. And as he's getting older, honestly, he's getting even more handsome. Every day is an adventure. For the last 50 years, not one day is the same as the day before. Now when he comes home at the end of the day sometimes, he says to me, "I can't believe I get paid for doing what I do." I said, "Well, what did you do today?" He said, "I went to 2 shiva visits, I went to a nursing home, I went to a hospital, and I taught a class." To him, that's what he was meant to do.